Well, not only am I just thrilled to be here, but I'm so thrilled to be here in a month when you're celebrating service. I have had the real joy of being treated, in every way before I ever arrived here to your special brand of service here. From my contacts with Nisa, of course, with Reverend Deanne and Reverend Ken, and from the minute I walked in the door, just lavished with support and care. So I know those of you who are here and a part of that, you help to bring it for one another, but I hope you also experience it when you're here and feel the real value of sacred service. I certainly am appreciating it. Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Ken, for your leadership in that. It doesn't happen by accident. You probably know that, right? Yeah. So I was thinking about service, sacred service, and thinking about how so much of it seems obvious to us. I mean, there were obvious signs of service when we arrived here today, for example. Okay, I got the message. My earrings are a problem. I was really hoping to just have my bling, but, I can live without it. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be bling. I'll be the bling. Obvious service, but there's less obvious sacred service that's going on here. For one, the prayer retreat is happening in another location, and yet all that they're doing is an underpinning of service for what's happening here this morning, what is always happening here. So, having somebody pray with us, it's an obvious form of service. But how about all your silent prayer? How about all the ways that you think about this community, you think and hold intentions? You have a mind that turns toward the good of this community, and isn't that prayer? Isn't that service? So I'm really been in contemplation about, as a person who writes on social media a lot and who unfortunately has to respond in prayerful ways to the real barrage of natural and human disasters that we have been, since I arrived in Silent Unity 2.5 years ago, it's been continuous, right? And forever I'm hearing from the prayer associate team saying, can you write us a prayer for the next shooting, for the next disaster? And, it can feel so heavy and so intense, and I know I'm not alone in that because every one of us is subject to the feeling, the range of feelings that happen with some of the challenges we're experiencing in the world around us today. And so when we post and post thoughts of holding a spiritual intention, you know what comes back because we hear it in the news, you see it in your own social media feeds, you hear, enough with the thoughts and prayers already, right? Let's just do something. And I have a visceral reaction to that every time because I'm a person of thought and prayer, right? So because of that, I've really been pondering, how do they work together? Because I also know, you know this, the training in unity teaches us that what we do flows out of what we be. That our doing always follows our being. And so my premise is, if we do not devote time to thoughts and prayers, our actions will not be enlightened. The actions that spring from our reaction to what is going on around us in our own circumstances will be reactionary. It won't help. It will just add to the chaos or the pain and the challenge of the world. Does this make sense to you? It's so absolutely clear to me that my work first, that our work first is thoughts and prayers. I'm not saying leave it there. None of us would say leave it there. But thoughts and prayers that lead to the inspired, aligned action that flows from them is going to be helpful action. It's going to be action that has a chance of making a difference where it's most needed. Do you agree? Yes. So I want to talk about thoughts and prayers. and a way of approaching thoughts and prayers that comes out of the disciplines of unity and also comes out of my own growing awareness of it as I've written and taught and practiced these principles. So what we know in unity is that our minds are a powerful tool. That in fact, the very two things that we teach in unity are thoughts and prayers. Think about it. Thoughts and prayers are the practices to get us to the state of spiritual realization where we can do some darn good. So thoughts, let's start with thoughts. Our minds are more powerful than we sometimes are happy to have to realize. I mean, to realize the power of our minds, when we really start to get that, it's pretty troubling because our minds are creative. So how many of you in elementary school science were taught that the basis of reality is atoms and molecules that are formed together in a certain way that take shape in things, and that's the basis of reality? That's what I learned, that all matter, all that is visible to us comes from microscopically yet visible with certain instruments, beginnings. Well, quantum physics has blown that out of the water, hasn't it? So what we know today is that's absolutely, that's the elementary school of life understanding. What we know today is so very different a message in that the basis of reality is consciousness. I heard Reverend Ken say that word a couple times already this morning. So what is that consciousness? It's the invisible out of which all visibility can take shape. It's the invisible beliefs, the invisible hopes and dreams. It's the invisible interpretations that come from our experience. It's the invisible trail of memory and patterns of thinking that we have developed many times unconsciously. Consciousness is our intention. It's our expectancy. What we end up expecting flows out of all those other invisibles. And what we end up actually seeing in the visible sense in our experience and in our conditions flows out of all those invisibles. So this is the foundation of all matter, is the invisibles. So we bear some responsibility for what we see and what we experience, wouldn't you say? So to me, the message of the secret, the message of the law of attraction is we are the creator of our experience. Well, this has been misunderstood. Experience and conditions are two different things, are they not? We're not the creator of our conditions. This is really helpful to know, because we in New Thought, in Unity, we have just taken over where fundamental religion has left off in so many ways. We have blamed ourselves for the things that we're in the midst of. Okay, don't raise your hand if you have been one that's done that, but it's been it was a refrain of the message. It was sort of the spiritual malpractice that says, you've created this. What were you thinking? What was your stinking thinking that gave rise to this troubling condition? Sneeze in church. Oh, what were you thinking? Right? So what if we understood this law of mind, as that it's more about my experience? Because two people can have the same conditions and very, very different experiences of them, correct? And so this tells us that the real law, the real power of mind is not what condition we have. It's how do we experience that condition? How do we live knowing that this is a condition that we get to deal with? or that we have in front of us, or that we are now faced with. What are we going to do about it? That's consciousness. That's the invisibility that we get to assert as the power of our own mind. And just think about that. So that's the thought. That's the thought, that invisible but yet very demonstrable thought, that thought that actually leads to some experience. That's where the power is for us. So for me, it seems to make sense that if I would devote more of my attention on those invisibles, what's going on here? What am I making my condition mean? And how am I going to work with this in a way that I can shift my experience of it? So this is the great power of the mind. I'm writing the third book now with my daughter, who's my co-author, my 36-year-old daughter. And we're writing about healing. And my title for the book right now is You Heal You. Because we're really seeing the power of our own working in the transformation of thought. So what we know is that we heal when we shift our mind, when we change our thought patterns. Then we change our biochemistry. We change our very experience of the conditions. And if those conditions would change, they would change from the repeated change of the way we're experiencing them. They have a chance of shifting and clearing. You know how it is when you've been like really, hammering away at a coworker that's just been a real pest or a pain or, right, intolerable in your experience. And the more you focus on it, the more they're in your way. Do you happen to notice, right? And then finally you get to work with your own mind in a letting go, in a clearing of that mentality that says that there's something wrong with them or that they're a bother. And you clear that and you heal that and you harmonize that. And 2 weeks later you realize they're gone. They're gone. Things do have a way of working out, and it's not magic. It's not our purposely doing something. It's our own healing that allows us to no longer have certain experience because we've cleared the field. I hope that makes some sense to you, and you've experienced this, no doubt, yourself. So that's the thought, that thought. And really the prayers, thoughts and prayers. Where's that song? Our thoughts are prayers. Have you heard that song? It's an old Unity song. Our thoughts are prayers. And so for me, when I teach prayer, I'm teaching the shifting of thought. I'm teaching myself and then teaching others how to think differently, how to lean into the things that are most concerning or disturbing in our experience, and how to work with them in such a way that we can see them freshly, that we can make them not a problem, right? Make them not the matter with us, right? So some of Unity's practices that are just perfect for this are getting really good at studying and activating and then using our spiritual capacities, our 12 powers. So as Reverend Ken said, the 12 powers that Unity teaches are really all refractions of the light of one power. But by dealing with them uniquely, we get to see some of the beautiful ways that they operate. And that we can use them. Because my premise is this, that God and the godness, or the qualities of God, are really nothing if they're not useful. Right? They're not, it's just a good idea, but it's not useful. God's not useful unless we actually could claim what God is and that power. That's what our powers are for. So here's a simple example in my own experience, and a pretty profound one actually. I want to just address the brain powers. So we have 12 powers, but there's 4 of them that sort of emanate from the brain. And I just want to give you an example of how I have used these powers in one of probably the most troubling condition in my whole life. It was a long while back, but it's still very important as a message and as a reminder to me that there are no hopeless cases. I'm going to say that. So 40 years ago now, when my husband and I got engaged, my father disowned me. My father was raised in an era where, where he lived in the inner city in Philadelphia, and he just could not even fathom a white Italian Catholic woman with the Catholic part didn't matter in this, but a white Italian woman with a man of African descent, right? No frame of reference for it. Kicked me out of his kingdom. Literally just disowned me. So you can imagine, it wasn't easy. Pain. Had 2 children. He never met husband, never met children. 9 years go by. I, as a spiritual student, I really worked with myself. So I want to just give you sort of a picture of what I did. So I'm aware we have the power of faith. The power of faith is right in the center of our brain. This power of our faith is our ability to perceive the real beyond the unreal. And the way we say it in Unity, to see the good beyond the appearance. I don't like the word good because it speaks of judgment. If there's a good, there's a bad. So I don't use the word good, but I look for what's real in this seeming reality. It sure felt real, right? That rejection felt real. And yet I had to really discipline my mind to see the real underneath there. Now that means taking a look at my father in a way that makes him harmless, that makes him innocent. Not easy. Not easy with what he did, right? Not easy. But so I was trying to figure that out, and also faith is expectancy of the positive, right, of what we most want. I couldn't even get to there until I applied another power, and that's the power of imagination, deep inside the third eye. This is our creative power. And so by applying imagination, what I did was begin to have a vision. Well, if I would have it my way, if I would want what I would want, what do I want that world that is my ideal world to look like? And of course, it was harmony with my dad. It was my dad in love with my husband and my children. A dad that, was one with me, and the whole family was together, right? And it was hard to imagine that because I had a body of evidence against it. When I would phone home, talk to my mother, my father heard my voice, hung up on me, and I was in Honolulu. My parents were in Philadelphia, and this was in the 80s when long-distance phone was expensive, right? Then I flew home for my maternal grandmother's funeral, and as soon as he saw me walk in the funeral home, my dad walked out the back door, couldn't even be in the same room with me. I heard he would turn my high school graduation picture down when he went in to watch television, because all of our pictures were lining the television. He would turn it face down so he didn't have to be reminded of me, right? I mean, these were things that I learned about and knew. And look, the 2 people he respected most in the entire world, his mother and the Monsignor at his church, couldn't convince him to change his heart, to open his heart. So I felt like this was doomed. I felt like he'd go to his grave before returning to me. So it was hard to hold positive expectation, you see. But what I did was I said, no matter what, if nothing was in the way, what would I want my relationship with my father to be? And so I started to imagine that and to hold him. In my meditations, I'd bring him right in front of me and have him there and really force myself to be open-hearted with him and to see him fresh. Hard work. 9 years of work, right? So that wasn't enough, because the other thing I had to do was try to understand, because holy cow, this didn't make any sense to me, right? So power of understanding is also in the brain. The prefrontal cortex, understanding and will are really high-level powers. So for understanding, there's 2 things I needed to understand. One was, what would make a person do as my father did? What must be going on in the mind and heart of someone? Because I really believe that he wasn't doing this to be mean. I really believed it was an incapacity on his part, that it troubled him, that it was painful and horrible just as it was for me. And yet he persisted because I wanted to understand. So I did get a good sense of the history in the world into which I was born. In 1954, the year I was born, that's Brown versus Board of Education happened in that year. That was when the 15th Amendment was enacted. Now, none of those things led to immediate, all peace in the land, did it? But they were the beginnings. But this was the time of the greatest riots and horrible civil rights actions that were taking place. I was born into that, right? But my dad was born into the world where he and his family were immigrants from Italy. He was second generation. And they were living side by side with the most poor in the streets of Philadelphia. And there was sort of like at least we're a little bit higher on the totem pole than you. There was that. There was the blacks. There was the Italians. The Irish. They were all juxtaposing for a little bit of a sense of dignity in the world that they were occupying together. And so this is the world that he occupied. It made sense to me. I could understand that his actions were consistent with what he understood. And as my understanding for him grew, now my understanding of me grew. And what I sought to understand was the nature of Linda, the truth of Linda, the you, the self with a capital S, the divine identity, the power that is within me to be able to look at life differently and to make new, different choices than being reactive in this situation. Does this make sense to you? So here I am with this power of understanding now, turning the light of that on. Understanding made it really easy for me to not to let him off the hook. It wasn't about that. It was more about like seeing the innocence in him and not holding him accountable for what he couldn't manage, right? Not holding him accountable for that. Trying to get out of that altogether. I got up above right and wrong. In understanding, I got up above right and wrong. And I just looked at that clear expectancy, what I most wanted, the harmony and love restoration and right with my father. That's where I landed. And so the power of will was just really, that's the last power here in the brain. That's the hard part. That's like, am I actually willing to stop the nonsense in my brain that keeps accusing him? Am I willing to cordon off that voice, and am I willing to fiercely, intently, and in a disciplined way to hold my heart open? That was the work, and I had to work with all of those four powers, of course all of them, because love and wisdom, they had to operate too, right? So that's just a little picture of the power that is available to us by activating these principles and powers that unity teaches. Now take that example, and by the way, 9 years later, my father had a holy healing. And I felt like I had helped him to lead to that because I kept my heart open to him. I never shut the door. It was easy when it was time. And he said, please forgive me. And I said, it's done. It's done. It's done, Dad. That was all we needed. Yeah. But the work that brought it to that's what's really important, because it doesn't happen by accident, just as service here doesn't happen by accident. Service of thoughts and prayers, devoting ourselves to that which we most want. I'm just going to say this. We don't even have to spell out all the conditions that we're experiencing collectively in the world around us today, in our country, in the world, in our communities. We don't even have to spell out what they all are. You know, and you're feeling the feelings that come along with all of them. What if each one of us here would make that kind of a commitment to study our own power of mind and our own capacity to really change our own experience in the midst of some of these terrible conditions? That's my proposition. We have the tools for this. We have the mind. That's what I said, when I started to get a glimpse of the power of my mind, it really bothered me, to tell you the truth, because like now, there's no excuses now. There's no excuses now. Look, this is on me. It's on me. What am I going to make of it? And I say that to you with all the love in my heart. What are you going to make of it? What are you going to make when you hear yourself next go on the rant? You know, go on the rant about something you hear in the news or something that's happening. You know, what are you going to make of it? That's yours to do. And I promise if we all would take just one little piece of that and do our work with that, you know, our experience changes, and that leads to the conditions beginning to change. It's the way it works, from the invisible to the visible. We're all responsible for our thoughts and prayers. And may they lead us to the actions that really will and are making a difference right here and now. There's my time. Am I good? Time for meditation. We good? Are we good? We're going to take a breath?